All right, welcome everybody to this week's episode of Beyond Geopolitics. I'm joined by my sometimes co-host, Marty Sieff today. Marty, how are you doing?
Surviving. At my age, that's good enough. Believe me, Matt.
Okay, all right, you're starting off with the right foot.
Yeah.
Good. And our special guest for today is Larry Johnson. I don't think Larry needs any introduction, but obviously Sonar 21 is Larry's core website. Fantastic resource. Everybody should be on that every single day. Your output is fantastic. You've got a full wide spectrum strategic assessment of things. And I just want to really just, you know, pull on your brain and see what your take is on a variety of events. Obviously, you've had a great amount of firsthand experience with your work in the State Department as an advisor, as a CIA analyst. So again, you've lived to tell the tale. Larry.
Oh, I'll credit the C. This is your taxpayer dollars at work. I was one of the beneficial things I did get out of the CIA was I did learn how to write and produce under pressure. Yeah. So.
Well, you're making that work for you very well. You're taking the geopolitical briefings and applying them to really just create. I think you're taking something that is esoteric and making it exoteric for everybody to access. You're revealing the mysteries that shouldn't be revealed, and that's highly appreciated.
That's what I try to do anyway.
That's cool. So today, I think Marty and we were just talking a little bit. Everyone's watching. I think people are sometimes suffering a little bit of exhaustion from the information overload. That's understandable, but it's important. And I mean, last week we had the revelation of the 28-point peace plan. Definitely stirred things up. At this point, it's been put through so many remixes by uninvited Euro technocrats, Zelenskyites who are all trying to massage the thing. The media's got putting spins on it. Trump's team, I don't know what the hell's going on, but now you got Witkoff, who's going to be meeting with Putin next week, possibly to do something useful. I don't know. So I'll just throw it out at you, and then Marty can do a follow-up question after you're done. But do you think that there's like a grand strategy that's smart behind this, or do you think it's really what some people say is like a trial and error, messy operation?
The West has trouble spelling strategy, but let's credit them that maybe they look. This is the I call it the Balsava 2 on steroids, because as happened with the Battle of the Balsava back in January of 2015, when the Ukrainians were getting smoked on the battlefield in the Balsava, they were surrounded. They were facing sort of their General Custer last stand moment. Angela Merkel and Francois Hollande got together. Merkel flew to Moscow, pleaded with Putin, "Oh, we gotta find peace. We've got to be away." And Putin foolishly took the bait. And I think he has subsequently admitted, okay, I got played. Because the entire purpose of that was to stop the victory that was coming to the militias of Donbass and Luhansk. Of the Donetsk and Luhansk, and to buy time. And in fact, 7 years later, in December of 2022, Angela Merkel admitted, we were trying to buy Ukraine some more time. For what? Well, to rebuild, refit, recruit, retrain, rearm, all the re's. It was the strategy. And Hollande admitted, that's what we were doing. So, here we are now, in 2025, and it's taken Russia, a little over 40, let's say 40, it took them 42 months to build their army up to a size that it could conduct without having to go on a war footing where you'd mobilize, 3 million reservists. Mm-hmm. They've been doing it gradually because they're not under great pressure. It is a special military operation. But by the start of this year, they had about 700,000 troops on the ground in Ukraine. And so now all of a sudden, you can open up 8 different axes of attack. You're not limited to one. In 2023, they basically are limited to one, which was Bakhmut. And then in 2024, it was Avdiivka. But now, from the north, from up in Kharkiv all the way down to Zaporizhia and Kherson, they're moving. And moving rapidly. And the Ukrainians this year have been suffering, on average, 40,000 killed and wounded per month. And then not my numbers. These numbers come courtesy of the Atlantic Council and the Institute for the Study of War. Not exactly what you'd call two pro-Russian outlets. They've had on the cheerleader uniforms for Ukraine from the outset. Atlantic Council says it's 20,000 desertions of Ukrainians per month. ISW says it's 40,000. Yeah, so let's take the middle. Let's say it's 30,000. So they're losing 40,000 killed and wounded. Then they're losing 30,000 to desertions. I'm not great at math, but I think that's 70,000. Then you turn around and say, well, how many are they signing up as new recruits? The Ukrainian sources say around 17,000. Okay, that's called deficit spending.
Yeah, that's real
This is
attrition.
deficit spending with human lives.
Yeah.
That's why they trot out this ridiculous 28-point peace plan. Now, the basic outlines that Trump and Putin talked about in August, it was two simple things for the Russians: demilitarize Ukraine and denazify Ukraine. The denazification part means there got to be new elections, and none of the Nazi Bandera parties get to run. And Russia's going to insist on that. They're not going to back away. That's not a negotiable point.
Mm-hmm.
And contained within that is the territories of Kherson, Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, along with Crimea. These now are permanently part of Russia. They are part of the Russian Federation. They're not. Vladimir Putin doesn't have the legal authority nor the political power to say, oh, okay, yeah, we'll give those back, or we'll stop trying to govern and rule there. No more. I mean, it's the same. Donald Trump can't just get rid of the state of New York and California. Say, yeah, they're gone. I don't like them. No, so that can't change.
Yeah.
Putin does not have any flexibility to say, okay, yeah, we'll stop in Kherson, we'll stop in Zaporizhia, and we'll call a ceasefire. No, not going to happen. So stop. My favorite, though, was the United States and Trump's talking point. Hey, Ukraine's got to have a 600,000 man army.
Right.
And the Europeans said, oh, no, 800,000. Okay. Do you know what the combined manpower of the armies of the UK, France, and Germany are?
500,000.
Yeah, 500,000. You read the blog.
I read
You're
the blog.
cheating. And then if you toss in Turkey, which right now has the second largest army in NATO,
Yes.
then you get the 800,000 on NATO's side. And yet here they want Ukraine, which, according to former Prime Minister Azarov, who I talked to about a week ago, Ukraine's got 19 million. They want them to have an army of 800. Roughly 5% of the population is in the army. Not going to happen. So the state of delusion on the part of the West, it's inspired entirely by panic. And because if everything that they've said about Russia, and Marty's, you're in Moscow, right? So
No, I'm in New Jersey.
Oh, you're in New Jersey. Okay, well, just check that. Yeah, well, if you're in Moscow, oh my God, the economy, they're on the verge of economic collapse. The military they're losing millions. They can't hang on, and Putin's on the edge. Well, if all that was true, why would the West be pushing for a peace plan?
Exactly.
I mean, it doesn't make sense because, hey, let's keep pushing, guys. They're out the door, and we get all of Russia for us. So I mean, it's just one lie after another in the West.
Mm-hmm. I got a question. Maybe Marty, I'll throw it at you here, but
Sure.
Medvedev just recently made a point, and I think this was reemphasized by Putin in Kyrgyzstan, that Zelensky won't be involved with whatever peace that is finally decided upon. What is he talking about? What does he mean?
I'd like to bounce that back to Larry because I want to pick his brains on this.
All right, Larry. Been deflected.
No, I mean, yeah, but before I do, of course, being Irish, have to get a word in 1,000 words in 8 ways. But my question to Larry segues very much on what you just said, Matt, and it is: are we at the end game for Zelensky?
Yeah.
Because I noticed even you mentioned before, even the Atlantic Council, some of our other old friends, some of the most slavish propagandists, are snakily sliding in their positions, being forced to admit casualties, being forced to admit elements of reality. And one aspect of that struck me recently, and I very much, again, want to pick your brains on this, is that in London, the Economist and the Financial Times, the hearts of darkness, the outlets that have been the most ferocious in pushing Western policies that have sent now nearly 2 million. I mean, I want you to pick your brains on the updates on this. How many Ukrainians boys are dead because of this monstrous war? Yeah. The figure, of course, as we know, is rising exponentially all the time. But the FT and The Economist were at the hearts of the disinformation on this, on a level, on scales that any communist or Nazi propagandist would have envied, as you and I both know, as Matt, of course, also knows. And all of a sudden, they are the ones saying, oh, Ukraine is filled with corruption. Zelensky's circle is rotten with corruption. I look at this, and I think I'm older than you, and I certainly look it, as you know. But
well, I'm 70.
Oh, youngster, I'm 75.
Oh, okay.
And at least you look younger than your age. That makes one of us. But I think you are therefore too old enough to remember, as when we were kids, the lies about Vietnam.
Yeah.
And we had the president of South Vietnam up to 1963, the great champion of democracy, which of course he wasn't. We set him up. He was the Zelensky of the day. He was corrupt. He was a dictator. And he was still better than the people who we propped up to succeed him afterwards.
Right.
But all of a sudden in 63, the story, the narrative changes. Oh, there's such terrible corruption in Vietnam. Yeah, the Vietnam War is still winnable. We're still the good guys. Nobody supports the communists. All it takes is one more push and we'll win. But now we realize, oh, this guy we've been backing for the last 8 years, gotta go. And they change the narrative. And that's what I think I see with Zelensky.
Oh,
now,
yeah.
I'm sure that's what you answered my question before I asked it, but please follow up on that. Are we seeing an attempt to do a switch and bring in a general or some other front man to replace Zelensky? And how long can they get away with it? Or will everything fall apart then?
Yeah, well, let's see what happens to Yermak over the next 14 days. You know, Yermak resigned, or he's left the studio, and he's got some stories to tell. He knows where the bodies are buried. He knows not only who in Ukraine's been getting money, he knows who in the West, in Washington, D.C., in EU, in NATO has been getting money, who's been profiting off of this. My business partner, we're not divorced. We're sort of retired, but we stay in touch. But he was approached with some whistleblowers out of Ukraine about 6 months ago, and they brought documentary evidence of the theft of $48 billion. 48 billion, not 100 million, 48 billion.
It was not M, right?
Correct.
Billion.
Correct. Whew. B is in bunch of money. You know, it got siphoned through the Baltics, banks in the Baltics. Gee, go figure. Kaya Kallas, why would she want to keep the war going when there are like billions of dollars flowing through banks in Estonia, for example, where she's from? And then that money
I didn't read that in the London Times or the New York Times, Larry. I am shocked by it.
Well, this is so. My partner presented the documentary evidence. It also it means the money was siphoned also as well from those out of the Baltics into banks in sort of the usual money laundering havens, and from there, members of the U.S. Congress, senators, and representatives from both parties, go figure, have been getting bundles of money. I know one Republican senator I'm told, received $16 million. Another Democrat senator received 23 million. The way to figure out who they are is just watch who are the most vigorous spokesmen and women for the war in Ukraine. And gee, the odds are they're getting paid. So against this whole backdrop, Yermak knows. He knows. Now, usually the way to treat him is you do the DM treatment. Kill him, because if they're, the dead men tell no tales.
Yeah.
So the fact that he's still alive tells me, you know what? He believes in the Titanic principle, survival at any cost. If the ship's sinking, find a lifeboat. Get on it. So when he starts talking, that means Zelensky, his days are numbered, very much so. And I think that this initial leak about the 100 million that was siphoned off for, whatever, when that hit the press 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, that was a deliberate leak from the West just to start lighting the fire on this whole issue. Because I think Washington is getting ready to say, God, we got to wash our hands. This is such a corrupt government.
And that refers to the Timur Mindish tapes that were leaked. Okay, so they're preparing the groundwork for changing the narrative, is what you're saying.
Yeah, I don't think this was not just the result of an intrepid reporter coming up. Hey, look what I found.
Right.
No, this is a deliberate leak to start to ignite this, so we can shift the narrative. The narrative now is going to be about how corrupt, which that used to be the narrative that Ukraine was the most corrupt country in all of Europe. And so now we're coming back to where we started. But again, all of this has to be viewed in the context of what's taking place on the battlefield.
Right.
Because the war is being won, and the Russians understand, whereas the NATO allies don't, that the military force is only one dimension in a war. There are politics, there are economics, there are other dimensions that have to be taken into account. And at least the Russians know how to play that. The West doesn't.
Yeah, right. And you had brought up, see, that you just introduced something that I wasn't really thinking about, which is the role of money laundering operations, financial operations in the Baltics. It adds a bit more coloring, doesn't it, to the motive behind, like, why is it that you have all these weak states that are part of this whole NATO drive to use Ukraine till there's nobody left living in Ukraine to weaken and destroy big bad Russia that apparently wants to take over the world, starting with Ukraine. But obviously after that, it wants to take over all of the former Soviet states, and then all of Europe, and then all of the Western world. Obviously that's what they want. But then the evidence behind that is more than lacking. Putin has made it very clear that he's willing to give as many security guarantees as Europe wants to guarantee. That's all that Russia itself wants, is just to have a buffer, to have some security. That's all it really wants. And no neo-Nazis in positions of influence. That's not unreasonable. But so the question I have here, do you think that they might get new fronts if the Ukraine, because obviously there are forces around Kalas and Ursula von der Leyen and Merz and others, and whatever controls them, I won't speak to that, but that seem to want to open up new fronts of chaos on Russia's perimeter if the Ukraine thing peters out, whether it's Moldova, whether it's Serbia, whether it's Georgia, whether it's all of the above and more, I don't know. Do you think that they have the means to get their new fronts opened up in time, or do you think that they're really finished, that they have no political weight or clout to initiate new strategic flanks?
Oh no, they've been working that. In fact, they're not waiting to start it. It's been underway. In fact, one of the things I've tried to tell the people I've met with in Russia is, if you're focused exclusively upon Ukraine, thinking that that's the threat, forget about it. That's why the CIA and MI6 have been active through USAID and other European NGOs to try to subvert the government of Georgia, and are working frantically with Pashinyan in Armenia, and as well as in Azerbaijan, or I guess as Trump calls it, Iberbajan. He forgets the Z, but puts in the B. Kazakhstan as well. It was 2 years ago that they attempted a coup. The West attempted another color revolution coup. So the West is obsessed with destroying and dismantling Russia for its natural resources. You know what? I think Putin finally came to the realization, because he's alluded to this in one of his speeches, that he said, we used to think it was like an ideological divide between us and the West, that because we were communists or perceived as communists, that once we shed our communist past, once we become devout Christians, which Russia is. I mean, well, it's a Christian Orthodox nation, but they've also solved that problem of how do you deal with 140 different ethnic groups and with a large number of Muslims, a large number of Hindus, large number of Buddhists. Russia has found a way that they coexist in a very lovely way, and I know that from my conversations with General Abdi Aludinov. General Aludinov's a devout Muslim.
Yeah.
But man, he is a fierce Russian patriot, and reveres Vladimir Putin. And he doesn't do that out of fear. I mean, this man's got balls the size of bowling balls. He's a tough guy. You've got this unity on the side of Russia, and they thought, hey, once they realized that we like capitalism, we like making money, we love Jesus, we'll get along. And instead, and Marty and I, we're old enough to remember, you're too young.
Yes.
This Cold War, during the so-called darkest days of the Cold War, I mean, the Soviets were providing pilots and materiel to the North Vietnamese who were killing Americans. And despite all of that, Washington and Moscow talked. There were summits between
exactly
Brezhnev and Nixon, and then we've talked to Andropov, and we negotiated arms control agreements. I mean, they were the communists, for God's sake, but we found a way to work with them.
Yeah.
Today, niet, none of that. Yeah. So we spend so much time demonizing the Russians as this ultimate evil, and the entire purpose is we want to destroy the country, and we have not stopped. Did you realize that one of the largest embassies in the world is in Armenia? Armenia's got like 3 million people, and we got this huge embassy with like 400 personnel in it. Mm. Gee, why do you think that is? Because they like caviar? No. This is I would venture to say, I don't know this through any classified source, but just looking at it tells me that the CIA has a huge presence there, because the CIA's got covert operations that are directed both at Russia and at Iran, and Armenia is a great jumping off point. And here you got Pashinyan, even this week, he's not participating in the CSTO, which was set up for all the former Soviet republics to work together in a cooperative security arrangement. And he's participating in a NATO exercise. Well, shades of Ukraine. That's what Ukraine did for 35 years, where out of all the NATO countries, Ukraine hosted more NATO military exercises than 24 of the other NATO countries. Think about that. So it's our playbook. We're running the playbook in Armenia while the West is losing its ass in Ukraine.
Yeah, and Pashinyan already gave, I think, a 100-year contract to a consortium to manage that certain strategic part of the rail and transport corridor that moves a lot of natural gas, oil from the Caspian into Europe, and that used to be under the control of the Russians. Now it's completely under the control of the Americans, which puts, I think, the north-south transportation corridor into some form of jeopardy, or at least it creates a vulnerability that wasn't there before that. Marty, what do you have to say about this whole thing?
Well, first of all, I wish I could disagree with any of your analysis, Larry, because it's so depressing and overwhelming. And of course, exactly, yeah, you know the answer. We've been in touch. You're right about all of it. And a very key point that you bring up, that I very much can verify from my own experience is something we never hear in the mainstream in America, and as you say, it's the genuine religious and social tolerance and success of those policies in Russia.
Yeah.
I 20 years ago now, again, I've reached an age, and you're coming to it. You know, when you think what happened 20 years ago was only yesterday, but I was running foreign policy at United Press International. And we had a swap arrangement, which I had negotiated with the Russian official RIA Novosti news agency. We were very happy to have it at UPI because they had much more resources than we had, and they were willing to share them with us. And I must say, during the 5 years that relationship ran, they honored every detail of it. They never tried to double cross it or slip in propaganda. They would have liked more of their stuff to have run, but they gave us freedom to choose. They never insisted you must run this or you must run that. They were utterly reliable and honorable in their dealings with us. But as part of that arrangement, I was invited and went back in 2005, and I was in Moscow when Pope John Paul II died. Mm-hmm. And it was, from our point of view, it was ironically timely because I was with several other Western correspondents, including a friend from the London, very conservative Daily Telegraph, to cover the issue of religious freedom or lack of it in Russia. And we were astonished and impressed even then by exactly what you have documented and pointed out, the degree to which their conception and organization of pluralism and religious tolerance is different from ours, but it was a genuine one, and it worked. And there was harmony with the Buddhist and Muslim and Hindu and Jewish communities too, and Catholic communities. The only people that they didn't approve of at the time because they regarded their efforts at conversion as being irresponsible and undermining people and destroying personal lives was, of all things, the Jehovah's Witnesses. And I didn't follow on that afterwards. But when it came to dealing with mainstream Protestant denominations, the Catholic Church itself, Western Orthodox Christian organizations, Jewish organized groups in Russia, not organized from outside Russia, but the Jews in Russia themselves. And we talked with these people. We talked with the leaders of the Buddhist community. We talked with the leaders of the Jewish community and eminent Muslim clerics across Southeast Asia. And they talked privately and freely to us. And again, everything you said, what we saw coming about being established even then. This is not a new policy or a quick lie put out to, just pull the hoods over our heads as if you and I are going to pull the wool over everyone else's head.
Right.
First, it was exactly as you said. But I have a follow-up question for you on this, and that is, as you've pointed out, and for the reasons you've pointed out, here in the US and in Washington, we have a bipartisan policy of corruption and silence and smothering. But from Europe, it appears to be even worse. We see President Trump appearing to try to reach a genuine, and I believe he really personally does want a settlement of the war in Ukraine. But he's surrounded on every side, as you say, with people not just whispering in his ears, that's the least of it, but exerting the most heavy pressures. But in Europe, it's even worse. We see something inconceivable during the Cold War. We see tails wagging the dog. Zelensky tells the Europeans, the Germans, the American, the British government, the French government, NATO itself, what to say to America, and they do it. And then when they do it, as you and I are both old enough to remember, anyone who spoke to, for any European leader who spoke to Ronald Reagan or Richard Nixon or George Herbert Walker Bush that way, or even Lyndon Johnson, got slapped down and hammered to a pulp fast and never raised his head again. Today, it's the opposite. They think they can throw the president of the United States around like a rag doll. First, why is this so? How is this so? And is there any hope or any alternative leaders you see emerging in Europe who can break this the ice, who can shatter this glass ceiling?
Yeah, this is what's so alarming about, I call it the balkanization of politics in Europe, when it's also coming to the United States. You don't have a single popular, single leader in Europe that I'm aware of, except for Orban, where they've won actually a majority of the votes, and they have actual majority of the country behind them. Keir Starmer, what are his numbers are down to like 12%, 15% support right now. Macron, similar. Merz, similar. And even the government, when Merz won, he won with a coalition. They have to cobble together coalitions. Same for Macron. So I don't think we've ever seen a period in when there's been such a gulf separating the public opinion from the leadership. And the leadership, I don't want to call them midgets because that would be an insult to people of short stature.
Here.
Yeah, we got
Peter Dinklage is with us.
Yeah. I actually think Dinklage is a very talented actor, and he's got they'd be better off if they were governed by Peter Dinklage, even though I don't agree with all of his politics. But my God,
exactly.
In terms of if you judge stature by the power of one's ideas and competence, Dinklage towers over him. So and we're entering that here in the United States as well, with a real fracturing of the political consensus.
Yes.
Trump has destroyed his base because of his pro-Israeli stance. There are, at least there's some rumors afoot that Trump may realize that and is trying to repair himself, because it's been reported that he's going to get rid of Susie Wiles, chief of staff, who ran Bibi Netanyahu's campaign for presidency in Israel, and Pam Bondi, who is another shill for Israel and a protector of Epstein and all things. So if Trump gets back to that, he's still got to deal with this issue that he ran on a peace platform, and he's behaving like he's George Patton.
Yes.
And so you've got this complete political chaos, whereas go to Russia or go to China, their leader, Putin's still at about 80% approval.
Exactly.
You couldn't, I don't think you could find three political parties in Europe, combine them, that would come up with that much support. So, what we're really witnessing, and Matt is young enough that you'll be able to tell your children or grandchildren, if you ever have any or do have some, about this. You're witnessing the birth of a new international order.
Yes.
Political and military and economic.
Exactly.
And old orders don't always die peacefully. Some go out screaming and fighting and thrashing about. But the order that was established at the end of the World War II, the Great Patriotic War, the International Monetary Fund, the Bretton Woods system, along with the World Bank, the United Nations, all of that is now completely in flux. The rise of BRICS, in particular, is changing the economic picture. Coupled with that is China's and Russia's realization that they no longer can be bound and held hostage by the West, that they have to separate financially, and are moving to do so, despite all the gaslighting that's going on. And the United States military has been exposed as weak. Even though we declared victory over the Houthis, my favorite is that Trump went on air and said, "Hey, the Houthis capitulated." And in my mind, I could see a Monty Python skit with the Houthis going, "Capitulate? Did you capitulate? You capitulate? I can't even spell capitulate." But we pulled out. And now we're off the coast of Venezuela threatening, oh boy, we're gonna really rough up Venezuela. I've decided that Venezuela is Spanish for Vietnam, because Venezuela is twice the physical size of Iraq, but it's got this thing called mountains and triple canopy jungle and uncontrolled borders with Brazil and Colombia. It'd be a nightmare if the United States actually tried to go in take it over and install our government or someone who's going to be our puppet, because this is a territory for insurgency. Just ask the Colombians. Colombian territory is a little bit more forgiving than Venezuela, and they haven't been able to eliminate the FARC or the ERP, the ERP, over 40 years.
Yeah. That's my concern looking at this emerging new order that's coming online. And I think everyone kind of has reached a consensus by and large, though some are still in denial, especially in the European sector, that it will have sort of a
Scott Bessent.
Yeah, former Soros stooge Bessent, right?
Yeah.
But so the terminology of multipolarity, the idea of a multipolar order, the major regional blocks is becoming more norm. Now, when a Mark Rubio says multipolar or when Xi Jinping says multipolar, I know it doesn't mean the same thing. And so my big concern when looking at the idea of what that means for different factions is either an Orwellian world of Oceania, East Asia, Eurasia, cordoned off under some sort of a big sick game of a joke that goes on for God knows how many generations. And that, in my mind, that's a dark age. That if we allow that's a dark age. The other healthier one that I tend to support or derive hope from is an idea of multipolar cooperation, a la, like Xi Jinping just made an offer to Trump to go to Beijing. Appears that Trump, according to his tweet, said that he wants to do it, and he invited Xi Jinping to come to Washington. I don't know if that's wise, but at least the spirit seems like the right spirit. Now, if the U.S. goes full military, regime change in Venezuela, or like invades, I don't know, Nigeria or something. If these sorts of things happen, that solidifies in my mind that the character of the thing cannot be trusted to be cooperative in any type of healthy new system. It means that you've doubled down on the worst elements of what got us into this problem, and you haven't let go. You've maybe changed flavors. So do you have any hope that the U.S. might be able to go through some soul searching and become the better part of itself, so that Xi Jinping and Putin and others could trust cooperation with a reformed United States? Or do you think that's too far gone? And do you think that it's only a matter of time before military invasion into Vietnam 2.0 in Venezuela or in Africa happens?
Yeah, no, I think it's going to take a major financial crisis and maybe a major foreign policy crisis that's going to hurt us and going to cause enormous suffering before we'll come to our senses. That's sort of what we have to go through, what Russia went through in the 1990s. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russians experienced a horror show. I've done probably 36 different 45-minute podcasts with different Russians over the course of my 2 visits in October and November. And all of them I've asked about, what was your experience in the 1990s? Now, some of them are like your age, a couple of female legislators who were, 9, 10, 11 years old in the 90s. There are others who are, closer to my age or, who lived through it. I even interviewed Slava Fetisov, who was he was a major hockey player. He's sort of what Michael Jordan is to basketball, Fetisov is to hockey. And he was in the United States during the 90s playing for first the New Jersey Devils and then the Detroit Red Wings. But even he, had stories about that pain. So it changes you as a nation. But that's where I think also Russia has something that gives us some hope. Because when you look at what Russia went through, where the average lifespan of men declined from like 63 to 56 in just a 6-year period. Good Lord. There's a lot of death and suicide going on. The number of people that went to work without getting paid. They went months without getting paid throughout all sectors of society. But yet they came out of it stronger. And when you go to Russia today, the wealth that's there, shared wealth, the middle class, very strong. They went from a middle class of about 7% were considered middle class by 1998 to, well over 50% today. So I think there's a path forward there for the United States, but it's going to be born out of some suffering. I wish we were smart enough to say, hey, look, I'm an alcoholic. I recognize I'm destroying my life. I'm going to stop drinking. Mm-hmm. And you stop drinking, but I don't see us doing that. We're going to have an intervention. Go ahead, Marty.
No, again, very much on the same page, Larry, because I spent a lot of time in Moscow primarily, but also in parts of heartland Russia outside Moscow through that decade for the Washington Times. First of all, as their Soviet affairs and then Russia affairs correspondent. And then even when they shifted me to the State Department, they had nobody else really to do it. And we had a couple of first-class stringers there, but because we didn't pay them enough, they understandably rotated to other things. So I kept being parachuted in there for 2 or 3 months at a time over number of years between 1992 and 1999. It was exactly as you say. And I thank God to hear you say it, because I look at the media, I look at everybody who watches PBS, heaven help us, or CNN, or the mainstreams, what my wife calls the drive-bys, because to them, all of America between the TV network studios in New York and LA does not exist. It's all a drive-by to them. And Britain, of course, is even worse, because everybody there, heaven help us, still believes in the BBC, and the free independent media, of which you are, and Matt are such major figures, thank God, in North America, hardly exists in Britain in terms of penetration compared with here. So people who I know, serious people, personally well-meaning, degrees, eminent careers, what have you, they swallow the pablum. But I was there. And one thing I always say to audiences, and I find our military, whenever I was on Navy and Air Force lecture circuits for 20 years, and this stopped people in their tracks. I asked people, you've all heard of the Great Depression, and even I'm not old enough to have experienced that, but you'll have heard of it from your parents and my parents and grandparents. And I said, but one thing you never hear is, what did the Great Depression smell like? Everybody knows what it looked like, and everybody knows what it sounded like, and the music was actually wonderful. In America, even through that, but what did it smell like? And then I'd say, I can tell you what it smelled like. It smelled like stale urine everywhere, because that is the way even the lobbies of American Express and Intourist and major hotels were in the 1990s and during the Yeltsin years. And whenever you walked in the street, you were always stepping over bodies. Most of them were probably just still alive, and sleeping there because they were destitute and nowhere else to sleep. And some of them, without question, were dead and would be cleared up, you hoped, over the next night or two, and there was nothing you could do about it. And this was even in Moscow. And the Western journalists in Moscow literally did not see it. They had their own narrative. And they didn't even have to be brainwashed. They loved their own narrative that Yeltsin was a Democrat and Russia was prosperous and the dark years of communism were over, and free market international capitalism and one world without borders and Thomas Friedman's demented vision of the world being flat had all come about, and everything was wonderful. So dead bodies did not lie in the streets of Moscow.
Wow.
But they were there. Everywhere. And outside Moscow, it was infinitely worse. And the young and the old were dying on an unprecedented scale, but they were dying quietly in their homes and being brushed away. And Time magazine didn't report it, and the New York Times certainly didn't report it. And all the great self-awarding economists and the Paul Krugmans of the West did not report it. But that was the reality of it, as you say. And it finally changed when Vladimir Putin became president of Russia, because the first thing he did, as you say, and this was central, he started paying the 40 to 50% of the national Russian workforce who were paid by the government, and therefore had not been paid, not just for months, but for many years. all of a sudden people had rubles that meant something in their pockets, and they could at least begin to buy food for themselves and their children, their surviving children. But
Right.
the Russian, and I'm sure you've seen this too, Larry, the Russian assessments of this are ignored in the West. But the best demographers I knew in Washington, even in Washington, thought these figures were credible, that at least 7 to 10 million people died
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
hardship, and the figure may have been as high as 20 to 25 million. I've seen very serious figures, not just in Russia, but by Western demographers, mainly in the United States, projecting those figures during that decade.
You mean
Yeah.
dead or departed? Like
Dead.
Oh
left?
no,
Dead.
dead,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Especially the old and especially the very young. And many more stories have come out since. So the narrative we hear that there was democracy under Yeltsin, which there was not. There was never democracy under Yeltsin, or rather, it was Yeltsin who sent tanks out to bombard the Parliament building when it was still the White House. And it was Bill Clinton who sent his election managers to steal Russian elections decades before they even started stealing American elections.
Yeah.
What was done to us was another classic example. As you know, Larry, I know you've done pioneering and fearless work on this. Blowback. But what's been done to us over the past decade, we did to them 30 years ago. And nobody in America cared or wanted to care. We were too much in love with our fairy tales. We were too much in love with our fairy tales. But having said that, you are breaking this conspiracy of silence. We know other individuals breaking this conspiracy of silence. Do you see the ice cracking, or can they still hold down the weight, the dead weight of lies on the majority of the American people until it all falls apart? How do you see it developing?
Yeah, unfortunately, at least here in the United States, and I think the same applies to Britain, we've had a role reversal. You remember what the Soviet information control was like with
yes.
TASS and Pravda and Sputnik. It was really government control. You all had the same message. Now, I've lived long enough to see a complete reversal where that's what the West is.
Exactly.
The West has become what I saw the Soviet Union as when I was, in my 20s. And it's shocking. And yet, when I go to Moscow, it's just the opposite. I have never been interviewed by any Russian media outlet where they've done a pre-interview to say, hey, we'd like to have you on air, but we want to, what do you think about this?
Yeah.
And what are your views? And then inevitably what happened, this just happened to me with the BBC 2 weeks ago. I hadn't been on the BBC forever, and they called up and they wanted a commentary on the United States cutting off intelligence cooperation with Britain because of British criticism of the United States. And I said, well, I've been loath to praise the Brits for anything, but good on them. And and so they said, okay, yeah, man, we'll talk to you in an hour. 30 minutes later, we've decided to go a different direction. So it never, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, CBS, we'll go down the list. They all do pre-interviews. They want to know what you're going to say first. Then we'll decide if we're going to have you on. Never encountered that in Russia. Mm-hmm. In Russia, they don't ask up front. They figure, you're going to say what you're going to say, and we'll go with it. Yeah. So this control of the media in the West is what's limiting. I used to be pretty regular as a TV talking head from like 1994 up to 2008. It was when I started criticizing Barack Obama that, man, I was shut off the airwaves. But we see today, there's not a single voice allowed on any of the mainstream electronic television media to present Russia's perspective. I don't want to say Russia, but just to provide something that's not pro-Ukrainian cheerleading.
Yeah.
John Mearsheimer, Jeffrey Sachs, Doug McGregor, Ray McGovern, Scott Ritter. There's a number of people out there that could speak up, but they're not allowed on.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so that kind of information control dictates that you can continue to lie and gaslight your public, which then allows them to continue to support policies that, if they actually knew the truth, they wouldn't support it.
Mm-hmm.
If I may, your own background, Larry, in the State Department and in intelligence was impeccable. You are a major figure in American national security, a patriot, a serious man. The people you have just mentioned, for those of us watching who are not familiar with them, are major figures in the United States, in their time in the United States Army, in diplomacy, in the CIA. Ray McGovern was a CIA analyst who personally briefed 4 US presidents on the Soviet Union and on Russia. So these people who are being silenced, including you, who are being marginalized, were not communists or fellow travelers or bought by Putin, or, as I have so often been called, a shill for Russia.
Yeah.
Exactly. A familiar tale.
Where's my paycheck? By God, where's my money?
By God, I could use it, man. I tell you. Exactly, Larry. Exactly. Yeah. We get those lies thrown at us by the people who are shills, as you very well know. Yeah. Exactly. No, it is the patriots who are being silenced. And if I may, you again have fulfilled a chilling prophecy, and a name I know is familiar to you too, and a man who was a great personal friend and mentor to both Matt and myself over the years. And that is, at last we lost him a few months ago, Professor Edward Lozansky, who was an eminent Soviet nuclear physicist, came to the West, was grilled by the KGB and given literal attempts at hell by them, became a passionate American patriot. Even Dick Cheney looked on him with favor when he first came over in the 1990s. And Ed became, of course, horrified by the way the US was going. And we were friends for decades. I first met him when he was an eminent columnist on the Washington Times, and I had just been brought on board, still literally green behind the ears from Ireland, you understand, back in the mid-'80s. And after 30 years of friendship, I was having a coffee with Ed at his home near north of DuPont Circle, by the Van Ness Metro, on the Red Line in Washington. And he said then one of the most chilling things I have ever heard in my life. He looked at what we were discussing, the way America was going and the mistakes we were making towards the world in general, and not just the Russians. And Ed said to me, exactly your experience, Larry. He said, Marty, the Americans are incredibly busy turning themselves into the Soviet Union, and they do not even realize they are doing it.
Yeah.
And I hear your assessment. And I realize you are documenting this. It is happening.
Yeah, no, it is. It's I find it astonishing.
Yes.
And the thing that's so refreshing about let's come back to how the Russian mentality. They have a completely different way of looking at the world.
Yes.
The U.S. version of that is a zero-sum game.
Yes.
They are a positive sum game, as are the Chinese. And if people want to know what does zero sum mean, there's a joke about 2 agents in Hollywood, 2 guys. They're sitting in the Beverly Hills Hotel, and they watch this beautiful starlet walk by. And one says to the other, boy, I'd like to screw her. And the other one goes, out of what? So it was about, how are we going to take advantage of that person? It wasn't so much sexual as, can I rob them? Can I steal from them? Whatever.
Yes.
And so when the United States is entering into relations with these other countries, it's not from, how can we make you better? It's like, how can we control you and what you're doing? And so look at Venezuela. Venezuela, up until the time of Hugo Chavez's attempted coup in 92, was it? The Carlos Andres Perez, he was a CIA asset, paid. And what did that produce for that country? Hyperinflation, poverty, hunger.
Exactly.
It was not taking care of the people. It wasn't building a just society. It was, we got to make sure our oil companies are getting their piece of the action. All right? I mean, for God's sake, even the mafia, organized crime, always does a better job of taking care of the people who are, in their neighborhood. You got to show the loyalty, but by God, you get a turkey at Thanksgiving, you get the ham at Christmas, whatever. The the United States we're like those locusts that show up to strip trees bare. And, we don't care what we leave behind as long as we get it. And what I've seen with the Russians is a genuine generosity of spirit, and one of like, how can we help improve? And again, that's inherent in what we get all flipped out over the Chinese, and their building of all these roads and transportation networks around the globe. Yeah, they're going to benefit from that, but they're not going in and forcing these countries to do it at their own expense. Where, look at the years of Western colonial exploitation in Africa. Yes. And what have we left? We haven't left better roads. We haven't left better infrastructure. We haven't left better educated populace. And yeah, we like to blame it on, well, those Africans, they're corrupt. I don't want to hear a damn thing from Americans about foreign corruption as long as Nancy Pelosi's walking the earth, and Bill Clinton and George W. Bush. And, let's go down the list of corrupt American politicians that have been enriching themselves for years and that trying to pretend that we're so much better than these third world grifters. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's really disgusting. I agree with you, and it's done by design, and especially when you look at where are a lot of those so-called, I mean, not so-called, they are wherever you have a lot of these corrupt despots installed into positions of power in countries that have been raped and pillaged by the World Bank, the IMF, Western financiers. Where do they get their education? They don't go to their local universities in Uganda or Namibia. They get brought over to Harvard, to Yale, to Oxford, or to Western-sponsored, programs in Dar es Salaam, and then they're installed when they're properly indoctrinated to be the managers, essentially working for foreign agencies to rip off and destroy their own people and keep them underdeveloped. So there's a top-down agency that's the same agency, as far as I could tell, as what's caused so much grief in our own misdirected Western world since JFK was murdered and onward. What are those same forces and institutions that created the Vietnam War, that did a lot of these false flags, that killed a lot of our better people? It's very much tied to what was doing the damage in overthrowing, Nkrumah. So we have this thing that a lot of people are just afraid to deal with, but it's real. It's a real issue. And now we have this very interesting irony because of the internet as well. Sonar 21 is just an incredible resource. We've been able to create a space where otherwise, if we were living 20, 30 years ago, it would be very difficult for this category of thinking to be disseminated to the population and have an effect outside of the controlled managers who are controlling the levers of power. So thank God for that. And in that sense, to be able to hear your interviews with people on the ground in Russia, to get a sense that, okay, actually Russia is the most multicultural place in the world. We think of them as this Borg automaton of authoritarianism, and that's how they're being sold. But you go to Russia, Russia's got 85 ethnic minority groups.
140. 140.
Really?
140. Yeah.
Well, there you go, right? And I mean, despite that, there is a higher, like you said, there's something more than the sum of its parts. There's something that is not zero sum, where there's a patriotism that's a healthy one, that's generally awoken. It's not perfect in any way, but you have a higher idea of a whole, like of what it means to be Russian, despite your particular ethnic group, which is protected. And in the West, which sells itself as being super multicultural and everything, here we have, we're on the verge of civil wars and race riots and other things, or we're on the precipice. There's so much tension. We're not doing it well. And the irony is brilliant. I just really appreciate that, and your ability to help amplify these wonderful, rich ironies, and hopefully that'll help to redirect the ship before we hit this what could be a very dystopic thing. I think you're right when you said that an economic smackdown of reality is probably needed at this point of delusion. I think you're correct. The question is, how do we ensure that it? Because that's my thing, right? Like, I think that could you have had the New Deal if you didn't have the wake up call of the Great Depression? I don't think so. I think you needed to have that shakeup. But do we want to have the baby, or like, we don't want to decapitate the Western civilization either, right? Like, so how do we make sure that we can get both the needed pain, but at the same time, the right way of thinking that will let people see the water to the fire that they need to put out, which is there. It's abundant. And I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but
Well, Marty, I know I saw Marty was he had something to interject.
hmm,
Yeah, but I mean, a frightening one in a way, Larry. But first of all, there is an answer to Matt's question. They should listen to Matt, and they should listen to you, Larry, and they should listen to Doug McGregor and Scott Ritter, and round up all our friends and colleagues and usual suspects, because you are right and they are right. I saw this coming 20 years ago. I wrote a book, 2 books, and I had to self-publish them. They were available on Amazon Kindle. They were rejected by 140 publishers and agents in the United States and Britain, which surely must put me in the Guinness Book of Records if I would be allowed to be, but I wouldn't. But the main one is called Cycles of Change. It's available. And it's a political history, perfectly straightforward political history of the United States, from starting not with George Washington, but with Thomas Jefferson, for a reason, because Jefferson shapes the era that follows him. And it ends with Barack Obama, who was still president when the book was published. I published the book with my wife's help. There was nobody else to do it but us in February 2015. And the book's thesis is this: there is not one America. There have been 6 different eras of America, each of them dominated by different regional interests, political interest groups, economic interests, different philosophies of mind. The very term conservative and liberal changes in each era. And each era lasts a generation. It lasts between 30 to 40 to 45 years at the most. Very specific. The era of Thomas Jefferson, the era of Andrew Jackson, the era of industrial America that starts with Abraham Lincoln and is fully brought into being by Ulysses S. Grant during his very underrated presidency. Then we have the era of progressive America, which all the constructive elements of which really come from William McKinley, but which is hijacked by the global imperialism and maniacal, quasi-messianic racist policies of first Theodore Roosevelt and then Woodrow Wilson. Then we have the New Deal. And then, of course, the New Deal era runs out when its constructive elements are displaced under Johnson, with the ghastly welfare policies out of control at home, and the Vietnam War running riot in Vietnam. Then we have the Reagan era. And there's a lot of denial in the Reagan era. The Reagan era claims to renew in America, and as you and I, especially of our generation, know all too well, it doesn't. It renews imperialism and it drains America dry. And America's industry is drained dry in free market economics during it. And now we are in the next cyclic crisis. But this cyclic crisis is so bad, it will be at least as bad as the Civil War, and at least as bad as the Great Depression and World War II combined. And I made this warning. It's all in my book, still, I hope, available on Amazon, Amazon Kindle, and it's called Cycles of Change. And I published it in 2015, and I'm working on an updated second edition now. Second edition is easy. I don't have to change anything in the book. I just have to put in a new intro to bring it up to date, and a new epilogue.
Yeah.
But the point is exactly what you have said, Larry. And again, here's the crisis. The crisis cannot be avoided, but it can be ameliorated. But the real problem is it's not being ameliorated because we have people so saturated in the true secular religion of liberal free market, fake democracy. It's not true democracy. It's fake democracy. And it's even worse in Britain. I don't think it's quite as bad in France, but I think that's because, in a way, France is breaking down more than Britain. But I think partly because of the language and culture differences, France is much more likely to revive from this, and Spain too, than we are. Germany, unfortunately, is crashing as fast as we are, and the British are.
Right.
And we need a healthy Britain. We need a healthy Germany. I'm not a German basher or a British basher, even though I am Irish. But it's terrifying what's happening. And again, you do have the answers, but nobody's listening to you. Or do you find more people are listening to you?
Well, we're seeing what we're doing with podcasts and with blogs and Substacks. it's an electrified version of samizdat.
Yes, exactly.
Because back in the pre-internet era, Matt, and I know it's tough for you to imagine, but Martin and I are the types that we remember those. We remember the first time we got
Yes.
onto an IBM electric typewriter, and it would self-correct. All you had to do was backspace and hit corrective tape, and we were going, "Ooh!" We're like cavemen discovering fire.
To me, it's still a miracle, Larry. I can't explain it.
Yeah. But back then in Russia in particular, the government clamped down on what information you could have, what you could see, and people always find a way. And they found a way they'd actually write it in covert printing and spread it around. And, so even then, when it was easier to control the information flow, the governments failed. And now they try to control it through social media, except, the conventional television stations, which once ruled supreme. And I'll give you the quick numbers. In 1968, in the United States, with a population of about 160 million, the ABC, CBS, NBC, there were 53 million viewers per night of the news shows. Of those three news shows, Walter Cronkite accounted for 28 million.
Wow.
So the other two were, so ABC, NBC split the other 25 million between them. In 2016, in August, at that time, the total number for ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, their total viewership, all of them combined, 27 million. Now with three. So what's going on is these shows are becoming increasingly irrelevant, and particularly for people your age and younger, they're not watching. They don't need to see all the erectile dysfunction ads and laxatives. You're not looking to get hit up with all the pharmaceuticals. So that's what you get when you watch the cable news shows. So they're watching podcasts,
Yeah.
and like him or not, even the fact that someone like a Nick Fuentes is attracting such a crowd around him, good or bad, it's a sign that the attempt to control and manipulate opinion is slipping through the governments, and they try to ban it. But there's this thing called VPNs. People are uniquely creative in finding ways to work around the systems the governments erect to try to control information flow.
Well, I think we definitely have a lot of constipated technocrats right now who are definitely blocked creatively and need a little shake it up. And I think that you're right, that human beings, the human condition, has as our species character to solve problems, to look at boundary conditions, and then to look beyond them. So hopefully things like this, like Sonar 21, like Marty, your writings are going to continue to amplify people's ability to have a better quality imagination with a better informed understanding of the processes that have brought us into the current conditions of crisis, and with an understanding also of how past societies have been able to overcome and not be stupid when the axe was coming down and instead move their heads. So thank you. We've hit the top of the hour. This has been a really great conversation. I look forward to future conversations with you, Larry, and with you, Marty. This has been Beyond
Thank you for the
Geopolitics.
invitation. Very kind. I enjoyed it.
All right.
Larry, come back soon.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.